I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, how was Prague?
It was good, bud. It was sort of a quick trip.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get sleeping right, you're already coming back. But I'll tell you, the hockey was electric. Like, it was so cool to be on the ground there, and pretty neat to see the Czechs win, on their home soil, in their home city. Like, that arena, anyone who's listened to the last few episodes while you were away, I raved about it, I'm sure, on both of them. I'll just say it one more time before we put it to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that arena was among the loudest arenas I've ever been in for anything. And I've been really fortunate to be a lot of big games in different parts of the world, and the Olympics, the Stanley Cup Finals, the playoffs. I mean, it was crazy there. And so, yeah, the entire experience was really cool. I think, I was able to get access to a lot of people and still rolling out the stories from my time. And honestly, it made a little impression on me. It'd been a long time since I've been to a World Hockey Championship, and felt pretty neat to return. And even just seeing all the reporters that are there from the foreign countries that obviously I don't encounter in day to day. I mean, it's a lot of the same people that were covering the tournament 12, 13 years ago when I was last doing it are still around doing it. So it was really unique experience. And I think there's still a lot of hangovers in Prague after the Czechs finally finished that thing off on Sunday.
I was my good friend Aaron Vickers was also covering the World Championship, and he was sending us photos of like getting beer from wherever. People were just handing out beers in Prague, apparently.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, it already felt like it was free anyway, because it wasn't that expensive to buy beers there. And I mean, I didn't last through to the very end. So I'm glad that Aaron stuck it out and had a chance to experience that. Obviously, he and I did spend some time together well on the ground during the tournament. And I mean, like, the content was insane. If you just follow the Czech Hockey Association's official account, like, they just rolled, it just was endless streams of the guys spraying the crowd, or David Pastrnak and his wife and his baby with the earphones on, like, dancing on stage like the Czech royal family. Or, Martin Necas was, who I know we'll talk about later, was like,
we will,
out greeting fans. Like, it was quite something. I mean, I think that we have to step back and remember, first of all, the Czechs hadn't won gold medal in the men's tournament since 2010. So it was a long time coming. It's, maybe a new generation, with Pastrnak playing, Necas isn't that old. Pavel Zacha came over, but also Lucas Dostal, who was incredible for them in gold. It doesn't get a lot of attention maybe over here yet in North America, but I wonder if that's about to change. He made 104 saves on 107 shots in the last 3 games, which are the quarterfinal, the semifinal, and the gold medal game. So games that really mattered. He was a difference maker for them. And so, I think it's sort of a compelling final that you have two of the not top teams. I mean, I think Switzerland's making a pretty good case with how often they're getting through to these gold medal games, that maybe they've climbed in the world a little bit more than we've fully realized yet. But to have the Czechs and the Swiss, two teams that aren't even invited to the Four Nations face-off next year, play the final of this tournament as we, transition towards the 2026 Olympics. I think it sets the table nicely for a new era. It's going to be a new era of international hockey, any way you slice it. Any team, there'll be a couple faces that were around on each team in Sochi, say, but they're just, every country is going to be introducing a wave of players that haven't had this opportunity. And I kind of got the bug, honestly. Like, it gave me, this isn't best on best, and I'm certainly not claiming it is, but it gave me a kind of the itch that we're about to get scratched here in the next, 12 months, 18 months in the hockey world.
One more thing before we get to our rundown, which, yes, you're right, we'll talk about Martin Necas. We'll have a Leafs corner and a few other rumblings and musings around the NHL world. I just want to say, seeing David Pastrnak celebrate the eventual game-winning goal in that championship game, that was an incredible celebration, but almost as epic as his Instagram post after the fact, where in the caption he's like, "So do we get an invite to the Four Nations face-off now?" That dude, he has the sauce. He has had himself a wild last few weeks.
Well, and don't look past the fact that he said that he might have to have off-season hip surgery. Like, he came over to the tournament not at 100% coming out of that second round loss for Boston. Obviously, he had to convince the team somehow that was something that they would allow him to do, because obviously they do have some say in releasing him to go to that tournament. He really wanted to go there. He, makes the transatlantic flight, plays the next day. The next game after that's the quarterfinals. Had they lost in the quarterfinals, his tournament would have been over after those 2 games. But he made sure to find a way to put himself in a position to score a goal. I think people in his country will never forget. And, for all the goals he scored in the NHL, he scored a Game 7 overtime winner in round 1 against the Leafs. I still think that the one he scored to win the gold medal or secure the gold medal is probably the biggest of his career to date. And, David Pastrnak, of course, would much rather be competing for the Stanley Cup, but that was the next best thing he could go and do once the Bruins were eliminated by the Panthers. And I'm with you. I like the swagger of it. He was upset right from the beginning that the Czechs were passed over for that Four Nations tournament. I think we do have to understand it's essentially an exhibition. It's only going to be played with NHL players. At this point, Czechia doesn't have enough NHL players. I'm not defending the decision, but it's kind of just quickly explaining how we got there. I think everyone has to take the right view of what that tournament is. I don't think it's historically significant. I'll put it that way. I think it will be the appetizer to what's to come over for fans watching more closely North America. But, winning the World Hockey Championship, as David Pastrnak just did, is more significant than winning that tournament to come next February, in my view. Now, what's significant about next February is going to be, it's going to be one of Canada, the US, Sweden, or Finland winning it. I mean, it's going to be a top nation that wins it, and that nation will kind of be in the driver's seat or will be looked at a certain way as we go to the following year to the Olympics in Milan. So, I can understand why Pastrnak is disappointed to be excluded. I didn't have a chance to ask Roman Josi, who was so good for Switzerland in this tournament. I'm sure he's not happy. Nino Niederreiter, Nico Hischier, the other players over there that had great tournaments for Switzerland. But, I'm not as down on the concept as a lot of people are because I just view it for what it is. It's replacing the All-Star weekend, essentially.
Yeah.
It's an international break that's been created by the NHL for NHL players only, which means Finland can't draw, some of the players from the National League that they might prefer to have in some cases, maybe in fourth line roles or specific roles on the team. But, it's still going to be pretty damn good. And like you saw what that meant to Pastrnak. And it was pretty cool all around. Yeah. I mean, even as a Canadian, I can honestly say at this point, like, I'm not like rooting for Canada. I'm not rooting against them either, but it's very easy for me to go to that tournament and just kind of get taken in by the emotion of the crowds to be happy for someone like Pastrnak, who's just always been a first-class guy to deal with. Actually, even we had a little chat over there. I bumped into him in the mix zone. He's like, "Hey, bud, what are you doing?" Like, he was surprised to see me out of context. But, I mean, he had an army of Czech reporters following him everywhere he went. They literally were doing interviews with his mom during the games. They're posting pictures of his kid. Like, it's a huge deal. Like, that tournament gets more viewers than the Stanley Cup final does in total around the world. Now, it doesn't get North American viewership anywhere near that way. Finland played a quarterfinal game and they drew 1.45 million in their country for that game. And it's a 5.5 million population country. I mean, they got 25% of the people in the country watched a quarterfinal game at the World Championships. I didn't see the final numbers in the Czech Republic, but I heard it's even a higher percentage than that. And so it's a huge deal for a lot of these countries. Pastrnak grew up wanting to win the tournament, and not only does he win it, he wins it by scoring the goal in Prague on a bad hip with his baby there, his wife there. I mean, what a cool thing. And his wife, by the way, is Swedish, and they beat Sweden quite memorably in the semifinal game. So there must have been some divided emotions in that house, but I think that all the emotion was in the right place when it got to the gold medal game.
For sure. Great work covering the tournament for The Athletic. Great to see your content over the last few days. And what an end to a spectacular tournament. Let's get to Leafs Corner. Why is and I'm purely asking this as someone who has kind of checked Twitter a little bit on and off the last few days. Why is everyone making a big deal about Craig Berube and Mitch Marner meeting somewhere? There's like this photo that circulated on social media of the two media. Was it a coffee shop? Is it a restaurant? They're just talking. They could literally be talking about anything, but we've decided to make it a big deal. CJ, why are we talking about this?
Yeah, Marner was wearing a Blue Jays hat. I mean, maybe they could have been there, begrudging the state of the local baseball team. It doesn't.
Maybe he was leaking. Maybe he's talking about those new City Connect jerseys.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could have been anything. I mean, it is that way. It's been made such a big deal, I think, because that's how hot this story is. Mitch Marner's future. Will he be here? Are the team going to pursue a trade with him this offseason? That is, I have to say, in Toronto, that is the story right now. Like I'm getting asked about that everywhere I go. I was getting asked about it in the Czech Republic when I saw a few Canadians on the ground there. I just think that it's such a hot story and no one has the answer definitively. And then you've got a new coach and that player. And then obviously the clandestine nature of the photo, it's like someone, I don't know if they hid in the other corner. And I mean, I must say, at the risk of sounding like the man yelling at a cloud here, I do not like that photo, just like what it represents. And there's nothing bad, and I get it. They're public figures and they're in public and no laws were broken, but I don't like the spirit of that kind of photo. Like, I feel like if you're in the coffee shop, you're like, oh my God, there's Mitch Marner and Craig Berube. Like, I think you should just go over to their table or wait maybe for them to have a break in their conversation. Be like, hey, do you guys mind if I get a selfie? And you might have got a selfie, honestly. Because I think it's more the when someone does it sneaky and then, my understanding actually is the meeting happened some point last week. The photo came out on Monday. So I don't even know why there was a delay in that. I mean, I don't know, but there's been so much of this, Julian. Like, I don't know if you've been keeping tabs, but even when Todd McClellan interviewed for the Leafs head coaching job, there was like a little video of him at the Air Canada gate in LAX.
I saw that. I did see that.
There was a Brad Treliving, Brendan Shanahan photo going around when they were at a dinner. There was that Austin Matthews photo with Dean Chenoweth, who's the Leafs assistant coach, and some people thought it was Adam Wild somehow.
I saw that too. Like,
my point is, there's a lot of this, like, what's going on in this off? Like, I've just cited 2 or 3 examples from like the last 2 weeks. Like, what's happening?
When did TMZ decide to camp out in Toronto and cover the Leafs?
Well, and the truth is not in any of those photos is anyone doing anything wrong. I mean, it's the off season and people that work together are like having a dinner together or a beer or a coffee and a chat. Like, there's nothing untoward going on. And so, to bring it back to Marner Berube, I literally don't think it tells us anything other than that Craig Berube is doing what any new coach is doing right now and meeting his players, probably laying out his expectations for how he wants to work, how he wants the relationship to go, probably asking some questions about, for feedback from the players. What do they need from the coaches? I think just totally normal questions. And we've had so many coaching changes around the league. Like, these meetings are literally happening everywhere right now. In fact, I saw Travis Green briefly in Czechia. He's just recently been named the coach of the Ottawa Senators. Well, guess what? Brady Tkachuk was over there playing for Team USA, Jake Sanderson, Ridley Gregg, a few other players representing the Senators. And look, their new head coach goes over along with Steve Stales to at least have some face-to-face meetings. Like, I think this is all totally normal behavior, but what isn't normal is the reaction that we've seen. And quite honestly, we still don't know any more about Marner's situation. I mean, I think that, it wouldn't be Craig Berube that would be working through that anyway. Craig Berube, all he sees is a player that's on his roster, a very important player who has a contract for next season, and he's starting to build a relationship with him. So
with Mitch Marner, when exactly are we going to know when there could be like a flashpoint or a turning point, or when exactly can we know something about that situation? Because it seems at this point now, all we're left to do is speculate.
Well, we're getting to June, right? So I do think at some point in June, something's going to leak out. I mean, certainly if the Leafs are having trade conversations with other teams, I have a hard time believing that would stay completely under wraps, as much as everyone involved probably would like it to and will do their best to have that happen. Or alternatively, if the Leafs asked Mitch Marner to waive his no movement clause or inquire about whether he would, and if he says 100% flat no, not happening, we might hear about something like that. But, the reality is the trade itself, if there is one, still a very big if 10 ifs, probably isn't happening until July 1st or after, when Mitch Marner would be officially eligible by the rules of the CBA to sign an extension. Because, I think that if this kind of trade happens, it would be similar to the Matthew Tkachuk deal, which happened, in mid or even late July, where he went from Calgary to Florida because he signed an 8-year deal as part of it. And that helped inform that the package the Flames got back. And so, I think that I'm not saying it would have to happen that late in July, but it's probably not coming, until basically a little more than a month from now. And so, in the meantime, of course, we're going to get a little bit more tangible information than we have today. I have no reason at this point to believe the Leafs have formally asked him to waive a no move clause. I have no reason to believe he's given an answer either way. I think that they are only still just getting to the point of their own off season, and they're planning, meeting with scouts and the like, to start charting a path ahead and see, which directions they want to go. And so, I know that's not the question. Everyone wants to race ahead and know the answer yesterday. But I think the truth is there isn't yet an answer. And probably some of the very key people involved still don't know 100% which way this is going to go. And so, the good news for you and I is we're going to do a show twice a week between now and into July. And that will probably give us a lot of content. But, as of today, what we know is Mitch Marner met with Craig Berube last week in Etobicoke. Someone inhumanely,
I love inhumanely.
Took a discreet photo and circulated it, and everyone's reading into it all kinds of things. And really, I just think they're two people getting to know each other. I even think, like, someone said, well, if they wanted it to be so private, why did they do it away from the rink? I'm like, it's because think about the difference between meeting your boss in their office, or if you have a meeting with your boss over a coffee or a beer or whatever, somewhere outside of the official environment. I think it's a different level of connection. I think there's a different comfort level. It sets a different dynamic. Like, I think it makes perfect sense to me if it's two people just starting to get to know each other. Keep in mind, there's no business to be done between the head coach and the star player on the team until like well into the summer, perhaps not even till training camp in September. I mean, at this point, it's literally about probably trying to understand each other, setting, some expectations and getting to know one another. I'll mention this too. I haven't even brought it up, but I spoke with John Tavares while I was in Prague. He had a 10 or so minute conversation with Craig Berube at that point. And he pointed out to me that as soon as he got back to Toronto, he was going to schedule a meeting to meet him. So Craig Berube didn't just meet Mitch Marner. I would suspect at some point here, with the World's now over, that Tavares will meet with him and probably any other members of the roster that are still in the city. And look, it wouldn't be unprecedented for a coach or a new coach to even go on the road and say visit Austin Matthews in Arizona at some point. I think that would be totally a normal thing to do that we won't have to freak out about if there's a picture at the airport with him at some point.
Stay tuned for a photo of Craig Berube and Austin Matthews to surface on your Twitter timeline.
I saw that yesterday kind of before it went big. Like somehow I just got my algorithm or something served it up to me. And I was like, oh boy, this is going to be something. Like this, this is going to get blown right out of the water.
I agree with you with the idea that taking a photo of those two, knowing very well it's those two and knowing very well what's going on, I don't agree with it. It's not something I would do. If I was a fan, I'd try to wait. I would do like a mental picture in my head. I mean, obviously, if I'm a media member in that market, I don't know if I take a photo either. Like if you were in wherever they were, no chance you do that either, right? Like I'm not doing that. That's just, you see that there, you file it in your head, you remember it for a story you want to write or just for yourself. I wouldn't take the photo.
But, keep in mind, like our job's a little different. I could go back to one or both of them after the fact and say like, hey, I saw you here. Care to like share what the conversation, I'm not saying I wouldn't use in some way to report that they had met together, but I wouldn't be taking a sneaky photo and under like a, not your real name, putting it out on social media kind of thing. Like I honestly, like, I'm assuming the person who did it's probably a Leafs fan. Maybe that's the wrong assumption to make. But if you wonder why some markets look better than others in the league, this could be an example of why this isn't the greatest place to play. Because there are probably 25 other cities at minimum where even if the same circumstances were at play, where you're talking about a star player and their future's uncertain and it's a new head coach and they're meeting sort of in the corner of a coffee shop, like I think in most places that photo wouldn't surface, but it did here. It would in Montreal, that's the kind of place for sure. Where
absolutely.
Like it's not just Toronto, but I'm just saying, I don't say it in a threatening way. I just say it pointing out kind of what's obvious to me or apparent to me is this is part of the downside of being on certain teams is stuff like this takes on a life of its own. it's probably why it's not wise to live in Toronto year round if you're a Maple Leaf. And unfortunately, the team has a number of players that are from this area. So it makes sense for them to either spend their summers in Toronto or up in Muskoka, which is basically like an extension of Toronto, but with trees and water and cabins. But, I think there's just the lack of privacy could be difficult.
All right. Well, looking forward to the next month and a bit where we get to talk about Mitch Marner and the rest of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Can I tell you once?
So, please.
One thing that happened to me is once or twice I've been somewhere and then someone has like tweeted like a weird grainy photo of me and been like, just saw at reporter Chris at Starbucks or whatever. And I'm always just, I'm not, I have to be clear here. I'm not comparing myself to Mitch Marner. Like this probably happens to him every day. And I'm referencing a one-time thing that happened a couple years ago. But I just remember how violating that kind of felt. I was like, why wouldn't you just come up and say hello? Because lots of people say hello. I hope that I'm always as polite as I can be. I mean, maybe I'm in the middle of something sometimes, but I'm always happy to chat with people about hockey. Everyone always wants a little tidbit. I don't mind giving out a little tidbit here and there, a photo, whatever. Like I find it, I don't like when someone is sneaky about it. That's really my main issue. I think it would be totally normal to see a player on the Leafs or the coach or the GM out in the city and say hi to them and be like, hey, even to say to Brad Treliving, like, hey, bringing back Marner. Like, I don't think that would be a bad thing for a civilian to say. I'm sure he'd make a joke back.
He would.
But like, or ask for a selfie or whatever. Like, I just think it's the doing it sneaky style and releasing it a couple days later. And I don't know. That's what, again, I'm getting older and the world's getting younger and maybe what's acceptable is shifting. But to me, it doesn't feel right.
I think someone last year spotted me at a Calvary FC game. I don't know if they tweeted a photo or not, but not only did they point me out, but they took the time to point out that I am a short person. So I understand how you feel.
Well, again, to your face, no problems. I'm fine with it.
Yeah,
even if you're like,
fine.
hey, I didn't like that you wrote this column or you got this dumb opinion. Like, I don't even mind. Like, I actually don't mind mixing it up with people a little bit in public. It's just more what it's like. You say it's 10 minutes later and you look at your phone, you're like, man, I just went and got my latte and like people are taking pictures of me and tweeting about it. Like, what are they trying to achieve here?
Spotted reporter Chris getting a beer.
It has not happened much, but I can't imagine. It must happen. It actually happened way back when, I won't name the player, but a visiting player who I knew pretty well told me of a similar story when I saw him at the morning skate. He's like, get this, I went and got a coffee this morning and he like showed me this photo and I'm like, it's creepy. Like, come up and ask for an autograph or a selfie or whatever. But anyway,
It's a celebrity culture. Well, especially in Canada with hockey players, I guess that's part of it, I guess. But you're right. Yeah. I'd much rather someone just be like, hey man, can I say hi? I think that's a lot better than just someone creeping around. But, I didn't expect us to talk that long about that photo and then have that extra stuff. Don't apologize at all. This is funny.
It's kind of got me riled up, but I'm trying not to be too riled up because I do realize at the end of the day, it will be forgotten about. Like by the time you've heard this episode, it'll already be fading from view. Like it's not, and it didn't violate them to that degree, but I don't like it. It doesn't feel right.
We'll start a new segment.
And quit doing it. Like there's like 5 Leaf related ones like in the last 3 weeks. Like, let the guys have an off-season beer or coffee or something.
You hate this. We need to come up with a segment about stuff you hate.
Oh, I'm not that grumpy though. Like there's not like a long list of things I hate.
Well, how long? Okay. Well, maybe that's for that. Maybe we save that for the end of season episode. Maybe we save that.
Okay.
Anyway,
it's like CJ's like his like list of grievances.
CJ's grievances.
It's my Festivus episode.
Like Festivus, we could do it on the day of Festivus if you want, which is December 23rd or 21st. Yeah, 3rd. December 23rd. Yes. A Festivus for the rest of us. Anyway, Sheldon Keefe, introduced as New Jersey
Sheldon
Devils
Keefe,
head coach.
no longer burdened by these weird photos because he's going to go work in New Jersey. And he's got a great hockey team to coach. He's got lots of stress and worry and all the things that comes with the job, but he's got a few less personal worries because not everybody's going to be up in his business in Newark or wherever he settles out there in New Jersey.
Dude can go to a New York Jets game or Giants game somewhere in East Rutherford or a New York Red Bulls game, whatever he wants to do. I guarantee very few photos will be taken of that man. Good for him. He's earned his piece.
He has earned his piece, and he's earned a team he's taken over. You know, one thing that stood out to me in listening to Sheldon's words at the opening press conference in New Jersey was just how he's never coached a team that wasn't trying to win a championship, which, you know, it sort of sounds like an obvious thing, but in his position, like when you're a coach getting hired into a situation, sometimes you're taking over a team at rock bottom. Sometimes you're taking over a team that you know is a project stepping in there, and that is going to take a few years before it's really trying. I mean, you're always trying to win every game, but before the real ambition of the organization is to win. And so, you know, it really does sound like the job was his to have right from the get-go, and that Sheldon had to work through things with his wife and his kids and decide, am I ready to work again? Is this the right place? And the more he kind of went through that process, and, you know, they went down and had a kind of a site visit there and got to meet some people on the ground with the organization, he came to realize that this is a perfect opportunity. And it's hard for me to see it any other way from afar, because, you know, he's had a lot of success as a regular season coach. The Leafs under his tenure, well documented, have not had a ton of success, but he's taking over the kind of team that, you know, we could be talking about as a Stanley Cup contender, maybe as soon as next year. I know they had a big step back this season from where they were 2 years ago, but, you know, when you look at the core of young talent there, and I think a pretty well-run front office that you know, doesn't make a lot of mistakes, that will have some opportunity to make decisions on players this summer, that could probably look forward to being a little healthier next year, because certainly part of the Devils last season was just key injuries to players like Dougie Hamilton for a significant chunk of time, that it's hard to replace that when you've already, you know, walked someone like Damon Severson out the door the previous summer. So, you know, they took some blows on the blue line, and obviously have really young talent, Simon Nemec there and Luke Hughes. But, you know, it's a long way of getting to the point that, you know, Sheldon's, I mean, this team is going to have the same expectations and ambitions as the Leafs would have when he was working there, except, you know, it's a fresh start for him. It's a fresh look at new players and, you know, pretty new environment for him to go apply his trade.
All right. Anything else? Oh, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that stuck out to me, I'm sure you saw his farewell video in Toronto. He actually detailed,
Absolutely.
I was going to ask how that came
next.
together.
Yes, please talk, because that was what I was going to ask next.
Well, because I heard all this, there's like this weird speculation he'd like made it days ahead of time and had like a professional crew film it. And I was like, I never saw any of that. And that clearly looked like, you know, spur of the moment. We knew he probably figured it was going to happen. And then he was wherever he was, and he said, you know what? Let me just do a personal thing. Here's my phone. Let's do it. It didn't look like a professional thing. It just looked like a spur of the moment. There was
thing.
a lot of nonsense of like that locally, and that never made sense to me. I was like,
no
this
way.
looks like, I mean, we all have pretty powerful cameras in our pockets now. I mean, cell phones are, you know, it's like carrying around a digital camcorder back in the day. Anyway, he told a story, and basically he kind of figured it was coming. He had a restless sleep the night before he was, you know, contacted by Brad Treliving and called in for a meeting. And he sort of decided he wanted to do this. And maybe, you know, I'm sure he thought a little bit of his messaging and what he would want to say. And he thought it was an important part of closure. And so he said he went right from the meeting from Brad Treliving where he got fired. He went to that spot that he called his happy place near his home. You know, lived in one of the suburbs of Toronto on the lake, and, you know, spoke from the heart. I think that's why so many people connected with that message, because it did come out, you know, within a couple hours, or not even, maybe within an hour of his firing officially being announced by the team. And maybe that timing is why everyone thought it was like this big stage production. But I think he just literally spoke from the heart right after getting the news. And then he said he took his wife, Jackie, to lunch, and that was it. And he just figured that was one way to have closure on his situation with Toronto. It would keep him from having to do all this media in after the fact. Like he kind of said his piece, if you want to say it, or he kind of explained where he was at and was stepping back from the public spotlight. As it turns out, it was only 2 weeks, but he didn't know at that time he'd be back working so soon because he did have term on his contract. And anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and maybe something we see more people in his situation do in the future, because I haven't seen a whole lot of that, especially so quickly. And I think honestly, it was I don't think it was done with like a big PR spin, but I think it was a brilliant PR move, because it's about the classiest way you can leave a situation. And I'm sure this is not on Sheldon's mind today, obviously, but I actually think it creates a circumstance where he could one day be brought back in the future, whether it's 10 or 15 years down the road. Like he left. The bridge was not burned on either side at the end of that relationship, and he's still a very young coach. And I bet his best days are still ahead. That's a pretty safe thing to be predicting.
Circle back to this episode in about 5 to 7 years when the rumors of Sheldon Keefe, should he return to the Toronto Maple Leafs, circle the wagons.
I mean, the Paul Maurice went back to Carolina. Cito Gaston came back to the Blue Jays. Lindy Ruff has just been hired back in Buffalo. Those aren't perfect parallels, but if Sheldon goes on and wins a cup or cups elsewhere, and he's a distinguished coach and one of the best in the games, and the Leafs are still trying to get it right in 10 or 15 years, it would just not surprise me at all if you started to see those kind of rumors go around. I mean, that's what's old is new again. That's how it is.
I've seen Michel Therrien and Claude Julien coach the Canadiens twice. It's entirely possible.
Exactly.
Twice. I still can't believe that happened. Jeez.
I just feel like because it's such a classy way to go out too. And like today was so well spoken at his introductory press conference. I mean, he seems like a new man again, because he can have a coffee with Nico Hischier here in the next few weeks and no one is going to bother him. They're just going to go do their job and get working on trying to bring the cup to Jersey.
Yeah. Wherever I'm trying to think I mean, then again, whenever we travel, I imagine for you, you're not trying to have dinner in New Jersey. You'd much rather have it in Midtown if you have to ever be at a Devils game. But
there's some good restaurants in Jersey, man.
Oh, okay. So I don't know. I tried not to hang out too long in Jersey during the
near
time
the rink.
I
went to the Dinosaur Barbecue a fair bit over the years.
They have a Dinosaur Barbecue in Jersey?
Just down the street from the arena, man.
Oh, come on. I would have gone.
You're all being snobby. Like I ran into New York City and you ran
I was
right
just trying to
ran
follow
right past the Dinosaur Barbecue.
Dinosaur Barbecue is
to Manhattan.
Oh! Dinosaur Barbecue in Syracuse is elite. I would have gone to that one in Jersey.
There's also some like old school kind of restaurants that I've been to over in New York that are like really good.
Okay. Well,
don't sleep on New Jersey.
I will never sleep on New Jersey ever again. Let's keep talking about coaches and Dan Bylsma. Speaking of what's old is new again, even though it's in a completely different city from Pittsburgh. Dan Bylsma is back coaching in the NHL with the Seattle Kraken. What do you think of that hiring?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because on one hand, you might view it and go like, oh, just another recycled coach, but there's nothing recycled about this. I mean, sure, Dan Bylsma has had 2 previous stints as an NHL head coach, but he did something pretty unusual. He went back to the American Hockey League, and in the first year he went there, he was an assistant coach in Charlotte, was then, for the last season and this year, the head coach of the new Coachella Valley team, the farm team of the Kraken, had all kinds of success, got to Game 7 of the Calder Cup final last year, and he's actually, between getting unveiled as the new coach in Seattle, he's going to race right back down to Coachella Valley, where he's starting the Western Conference Finals later this week with the Firebirds. And so, I think it says something interesting about Dan Bylsma that after having the success he's had prior in his career, that he was willing to do that. And I wonder if he doesn't come back for a different coach. I mean, it's, again, not perfect parallels, but Mike Sullivan is someone who had a similar path earlier in his career, had a stint back in the AHL before he had this run with Pittsburgh that's made him so successful. I mean, Bruce Cassidy had a long wait from when he was a coach in Washington, coached the American Hockey League with Providence and came up with Boston, and he's since won a Stanley Cup. And so, I think it's kind of an interesting set of decisions by Bylsma. And he told the reporters in Seattle today that, it kind of rejuvenated him as a coach from where he was at. And so, it's an interesting hire. And another thing, Dan Bylsma hired Jessica Campbell to be his assistant coach in Coachella Valley. And he mentioned today, I mean, certainly nothing's done as of this point, but that she would be under consideration to join his staff in Seattle. And she was the first sort of full-time assistant coach in the AHL, like on the bench, running the power play for the Firebirds. If she was elevated to the NHL alongside him, she would be the first in the NHL level to do that as a full-time female assistant coach. There's a video coordinator in Washington, Emily Nangle-Natsky. But it's interesting. Like he that's an organization that's had, clearly they've wanted to establish themselves in a different way, made different kinds of hires, really made, diversity in every possible aspect of the organization a priority. And so I think he fits in nicely. Obviously, he's been part of the culture of the team because he's been in the AHL, with the organization, but, brings maybe an openness to do things differently than some of others around the league. So, I think that team is going to be interesting to watch this year. Didn't go well in Seattle at all. The scoring just totally disappeared. They had kind of a bit of a Cinderella run into the second round last year, knocked off producer Nick's Avalanche in the first round.
Producer Drew's Avalanche.
Oh, producer Drew's. Man, now I'm sorry, Nick. I don't mean to label you. Producer Drew's Avalanche.
Producer Nick's team did go to the second round that year too. We know what happened after that, though.
Well, But yeah, I think Bylsma there's a little bit more than on the surface if you just read the headline there. I think is kind of what I'm getting at, that I think he's an interesting hire because of what he's done since he last was in the NHL. He's taking over an organization now that, their expectations are going up internally. And, I'll be very curious to see if Jess Campbell ends up on his bench too.
Producer Nick, for the first time in the history of the show, decided to use the chat feature. Don't be sorry. I would rather be an Avs fan, less heartbreak. You might as well just do that for yourself, buddy. Why not? Anyway.
You can't just change like that. That's not how fandom works.
I mean, I think if you've suffered enough and you commit to going on another team, I don't see the issue. As long as you're not bandwagoning and purposely just going on a really good team.
I'll say this. I have no personal issue. I just think people have a difficult time doing it. Like, your heart kind of is where your heart is.
You know what?
Nick says he's a Golden Knights fan next year.
Okay, well, clearly he took the second part of what I was saying. He did not take that to heart. But I also understand where you're coming from, too. Like, you grow up cheering for a team, you see the misery, you endure the misery, you want to distance yourself from it, but you just can't leave. It's a terrible relationship to be in, but for whatever
Hotel
reason,
California, man. It's Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave.
Never leave. You're absolutely right.
I mean, that's me at the Blue Jays right now. Like, I don't even want to go in on them, but I am so close. I am so frustrated. I'm so apathetic.
Oh man. I'm sorry, dog. This team sucks. This team sucks.
I know. The only, I'm at the stage where I've convinced myself it's a good thing because I assume everyone is going to get fired.
I mean, that's what has to happen at this point, right? Like, there's no confidence in Mark Shapiro and Atkins.
Why was there ever?
There was never. They suck.
Like, bring back Alex Anthopoulos. Right the wrong.
He ain't coming back, bruh.
He might come back.
You think he comes back?
Get that big Rogers money on the table some point down the road. Like, why not?
I mean, I guess, but like,
we just went on about how so many times players or coaches or executives can come back to a place.
I guess. I don't know. I'd be surprised about it. I think he's doing all right for himself in Atlanta. I think he's fine there, but that would be very interesting if they decide. I mean,
he started in the mailroom with the Jays, like literally.
He did. Yeah, he came up. Montreal boy did his thing.
An intern. But I'm just saying, like, you can't tell me that if they didn't go to him and be like, we were wrong, here is so much money, you're going to need, like, help counting it, and we need you to save this and get it right. Like, I have a hard time believing I don't know his contractual status. I'm just a fan, man. I'm not, this is no insider reporting, but, like, if he gets to a point where he might be a free agent, you can't tell me there's no world he wouldn't come back. He's beloved here.
People loved him here, and the Jays still said, "Screw it, man, you're done." Like, they should have never let that.
They're going to look to the Cleveland organization because they've got it right so many times. They're gonna solve this mess.
Oh man, tell us how you really feel, CJ.
But anyway, I can't do that. Like, I can't say this and then go become a Yankees fan. Like, it's not happening ever. I will just suffer through this summer. It's going to be brutal.
I mean, you could become like,
no,
not really a Mariners fan. No.
There's nowhere for me to go.
That's why I can't wait till the Expos come back, and then I can hop right back on that bandwagon.
Yeah, well, see,
50 years
that's
time.
fair. That's fair. All right.
Oh, God.
Haven't seen you
Okay.
for a week, and we're already just like all over the place. I love it.
Okay, let's get out of our feelings with our baseball teams and talk about Don Waddell joining the Columbus Blue Jackets. Can I just say something real quick here? Because in our group chat, we talk about a lot of different stuff. When you first brought up the possibility that Don Waddell would be joining the Blue Jackets, I was like, why? Like, really? Huh? And then all of a sudden, the wheels start turning in motion. And then one thing leads to another, and another report, another report. I kept thinking of you the entire time because I was like, how? But also still, why? Can you make sense of why Don Waddell would jump ship from Carolina to Columbus? Also, it's hilarious that we wondered about Rod Brindamore's future when the whole time we should have been wondering about Don Waddell's.
Well, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, he worked.
There is a lot
in
there.
Carolina for a long time. I think it was just time for a new challenge, a new set of circumstances. Money talks too. Although I don't want to introduce that as like a main thing, but there's an opportunity. He's like any free agent. He was coming up on the end of his deal, and there was outside interest, and that's usually a good thing, right? I mean, if you're Sam Reinhart right now on 57 goal season, and Florida isn't paying you what you want, even as much as you love playing there, it's pretty nice that on July 1st, every single other team in the league can pick up the phone and sign you to any amount of dollars, as long as it's not more than 20% of the cap on a 7-year deal. So, that's partly what happened. And look, Don Waddell has a very unique set of circumstances. I think a lot of people focus on what he can't do, or they focus on the fact that obviously he's had a really strong front office, in Carolina with Eric Tulsky and Darren York and some others, Aaron Schwartz there, helping make decisions under him, just as every general manager has people they lean on. But he also has a very strong business background. He started as the president of the business side of the Hurricanes before he got added the GM's title. And so I think he brings a unique set of skills to the Blue Jackets, because he can, help them on the business side of the operation. Obviously has the top hockey title here with John Davidson transitioning into sort of an advisory role. And, he may or may not end up hiring someone else. He's also got people like Rick Nash, who's just fresh off being the GM at Canada's team at the World Championship, but he's been in the Columbus front office. Josh Flynn, who's been there for a long time, who does a lot of their cap related and legal work. I think that when I think of Don Waddell, I think of someone who's very comfortable working in a collaborative environment, which is a positive thing. So why now? Well, his contract was up. I think he was ready for something new. He had an intriguing and compelling opportunity, and he's getting pretty nice set of titles, and one would assume a commiserate pay raise on what he was earning, and so he went for it. And I actually think it's a smart move. We'll see. They're still gonna have to sort of figure out how that front office works, and I think that work has really not yet even begun. Like I don't think that there's been discussions there, but this is a pretty unique person, just given even his experience way back in Atlanta. He was a general manager there for a long time. He's got a different set of skills than some, and I think he's a collaborative worker, and that organization has been down and out for a long time, but they do have prospects and picks, and now they're going to have kind of a fresh look on what needs to happen next to pull them up.
I wonder what that next step for Don Waddell is now that he's in charge in Columbus. Like, what's he thinking about with this roster? Does Pascal Vincent stay on as head coach? Like, I wonder what he's thinking next.
Well, I think that certainly Vincent is in the crosshairs to some degrees. Tough situation. Remember, he was made the head coach when Mike Babcock parted ways with the organization like a day or two before training camp. His first head coaching job on a roster that was not well put together, and it didn't go well this year. I think it's fair to say. He tried to take a tough stance with some people, but the other part of this is typically general managers don't like to come in and fire the coach right away. I mean, usually they want to see a year. For one, it's one of the bullets you can have in the chamber. It's one of the things, the levers you can pull if things aren't going well. And secondly, you don't know the head coach yourself in this case. And so, why not give that person who's already under contract a chance to, maybe pleasantly surprise you if it doesn't go well and it's another bad season and the dynamic isn't right. Then you can make a move next summer. I mean, you're also kind of at a disadvantage right now where basically every team in the league has found their person for the head coaching job. It's only San Jose at this point in time that has yet to fill the head coaching role. And so, unless Don Waddell has someone specifically in mind, maybe someone he's worked with in the past. I mean, I don't know if it makes the most sense to fire the coach. As for the roster, Patrick Laine, I mean, he's been in the NHLPA player assistance program. Where do things go with him? I think that is a big decision. If he's at a point where, he can come out of that to enter next season and be back as a player. But there's they've got a lot of cap space. They've got a lot of young players. I mean, Kent Johnson is a prospect that I know teams have shown interest in the past. Do you stay patient there? Do you move him? I mean, there's a lot you can do. I mean, it's a fresh set of eyes on all these things. And really, I think they're going to want to turn themselves into what Carolina just was, an organization that is perpetually winning, that has a chance every year, that excites the local community. I mean, the Hurricanes were down and out for a time, but now it's one of the great places to go watch a game. I know they haven't got over the hump. I know they have big question marks themselves this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think Waddell has shown that he can be part of a front office that makes that kind of transformation. And so that's why I do feel it's a sort of sneaky savvy hiring here by the Blue Jackets.
Have you heard anything about the vacancy in San Jose? I know Marco Sturm, former San Jose Shark in his playing days, has been listed as a possibility for that job.
Yeah, I think that he seems to be the front runner. But that being said, I don't get the feeling San Jose is in a huge hurry or on a timeline where they feel they have to wrap something up. Sturm has said he wants a chance. Former player in the organization, a German citizen of which, the owner, Hasso Plattner, is. And I don't know of specific connections between them, but it's not unreasonable to assume there might be some. And just an up-and-coming coach, who's spent time both as an assistant in the NHL and then in the American Hockey League as a head coach. And so, I think that he seems the most likely, but they're taking their time there in San Jose. And they're looking for a different coach maybe than some others might. I mean, in this case, you're perhaps, doesn't necessarily have to be a first-time head coach, but maybe you're comfortable bringing in a coach that can grow with the group because, it's going to be another pretty young team there, I would say, moving forward. And you're building up. They're not setting the bar at make the playoffs next season. And it's kind of what I was referencing with the Keefe thing, right? I'm not sure that that's the kind of scenario someone like Sheldon Keefe would be as interested in as versus being in the fire with a team that's expected to win, 2 out of every 3 games. So I think that they can consider different candidates and maybe not be as rushed as other places because they're looking to have someone grow with their team.
Staying with San Jose, Will Smith, their 4th overall pick from the 23 draft, he signed with the team as entry-level deal. And now people are wondering when it comes time for them to draft Macklin Celebrini, does he do the same thing or does he stay in college for at least one other season? How do you see that situation going?
Well, I don't know that one necessarily completely affects the other. Like, I think ultimately Celebrini has to do what he and his family think is best for him. And it's pretty unusual to have a 1st overall pick not jump straight to the NHL. It's happened over the years, but not too many times, not a whole lot. But there's much worse things than going back to college in Boston for one more year and just, spending time around your friends, being in the student athlete environment. The NCAA has become such a great producer of NHL talent over the last number of seasons. I mean, it happened 30 years ago, but it's happening. I mean, you're seeing more and more players step right out of college and be stars. I mean, Cale Makar is one recent example, walked right out and he's like a point a game defenseman, like immediately he steps into the league. And so, I think that development path will really still be in the Celebrini family's hands, in talking with the Sharks. But, at the very least, he would have someone basically his own age going through the same things together. I mean, that was beneficial, for example, I think of the young Leafs when basically Nylander, Marner, and Matthews were all rookies at the same time, along with Zach Hyman and Connor Brown. I mean, they had a lot of players on that team that were kind of growing up together. And so, I think we'll just have to see how everything plays out here over the next few weeks after the draft and where things land. But, obviously the Sharks are excited to get Will Smith signed and, start. I mean, they've started the rebuilding process, but they haven't introduced that many prospects into the lineup. I mean, this is the next phase, right? Where you actually, it's not just the promise. It's like, okay, what's the player doing, and watching them grow and, bringing some excitement to the fan base that I'm sure they're feeling after that news.
Is Brian Berube the last number 1 overall pick to not start in the NHL right away?
I was afraid you were going to ask this because I started saying
because you said 30 years ago, so I immediately just went to Google.
There must have been one since, no?
Well, Brian Berube was drafted by the Senators, and then it looked as if he thought he was going to play in the NHL, and then ends up going to junior, and then gets traded to the Islanders. I don't know who is Joe Thornton a possibility. I know he had a bit of
no. He just had a really tough rookie year, but he as an 18-year-old he played for the Bruins.
It might be him, unless there's someone else. I'm sure there are people listening to this episode who are
someone is yelling because they know the
now.
answer. I mean,
technically Ovechkin, because there was a lockout that doesn't really count,
right? But it sort of satisfies the criteria. It wasn't a decision, but he's the first player, the last player you can say with certainty. What about Patrick Stefan? Did he go right to Atlanta? I think in '99 he was drafted first overall.
So '99 he's drafted. Yeah, he played his first season. He played the 99-2000 season with the Atlanta Thrashers. Yes.
Remember there were some questions about Slavkovsky. I mean,
there absolutely were.
There absolutely were. Playing with the Canadians, unfortunately getting injured, missing a chunk of that first season. But there was questions about whether it was best for him or what he would do.
I wondered if he was getting AHL games after he was drafted. That ultimately didn't come to fruition.
Right. Anyway, it's unusual, but the Sharks are in an unusually bad situation too. That team was flat out horrible last year. And
garbage.
So, you're not I'm just trying to think of the right way to say it, but you have that's part of the calculation. You're not winning anything. Maybe he wants to go back to college. I don't know what he's thinking, so I don't want to say too much more, but it's I don't think one guarantees the other joins him there.
Okay. And also, I'm sure if Brian Berube is not the guy, I guess you could just tweet at us who the last number 1 overall pick. Lockouts excluded to not start in the NHL right away. Lafreniere started in the NHL right away. He just had a pandemic kind of derail it.
Right.
We're literally
something obvious is probably staring us in the face, and we're just
God. Oh well.
He sure jumped straight in.
I believe he did. I can't see any reason why he wouldn't have. We're gonna. This is gonna bother us. We're gonna try to figure out a way to figure this out. But I think Brian Berube is the last guy. Anyway, it's time to get to questions. Ask CJ. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions on Discord and on Twitter. Let's start with this first one from our friend of the show, Murat Atesh, who covers the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic. Is CJ the sort of fellow that books his next haircut well in advance with regularity? He seems like he might be that organized.
I'm glad that I've somehow projected that to Murat, but I am not that person. I am very much booked 3 to 4 days out. On, let's say, a weekend, I'm like, oh, I got time this week, and look for a time with my guy Safe, and that's it. So I am not that organized. I book dentist appointments, 4 months out, 6 months out, whatever frequency. But beyond that, I'm not. I do fly by the seat of my pants, if I'm being honest, with a lot of sort of that kind of thing. I mean, we got busy jobs, as most people do, untraditional lives, a lot of weekend work, night work. So I just squeeze all this stuff in where it fits when time gives.
From Gavin Jench. I'm sorry if I'm not saying the name, so I'll say you're at Gav23. How is the hand, CJ? You remember when your hand got busted?
Yeah, it's still there.
It's just showing the hand off. Can you remind everyone what happened?
Scar off.
Yeah, exactly.
Can
you remind everyone what happened?
I had hand surgery in January 2023, so a little more than a year and not quite a year and a half ago. I have full range of motion with it.
Good.
I wasn't able to play golf really last summer Not that I'm a huge golfer, but I do try to get out for some rounds, but because of the impact on my palm was still healing. But it's funny, I started thinking yesterday, I'm like, I think I can actually play golf as much as my heart desires this summer because everything feels a lot better. So happy to report no troubles there. Run streak still intact. Everything's still good, man. Just keeping this old body moving.
Absolutely. From Matthew off Discord. Hi, CJ. Who do you see replacing Manny Malhotra as Leafs assistant coach? Malhotra just taking the job as the Canucks AHL affiliates head coach.
Not sure. I don't think Craig Berube knows. They also have Dean Chenault, who's on an expiring deal in Toronto. Some questions about whether Guy Boucher would be back, another assistant on the staff. And so it might not just be replacing one assistant. You might potentially see 2 or even 3 assistants be replaced. And, there's a number of experienced assistant coaches around the league that are still looking for work. And, I don't know who's going to end up in Toronto just yet, but, that's not so abnormal. I mean, usually as we get to June, the head coaching situations get settled, and then a lot of the assistants, kind of get done after the fact because, when new head coaches come in, sometimes they keep coaches, others get let go. I mean, Brad Lauer was just let go in Winnipeg this week when Scott Arniel took over, for example. So, there's not a full picture yet of who's available on the assistant coaching front, but I'll let you know when I know.
From Luke Hawking, question for CJ. Buffalo and Ottawa have both not lived up to the expectations so far with their young core. Is it time for them to make a change to their respective core groups? This could also be a good segue into some of the discussions that have kind of surfaced out there around Brady Tkachuk and his future.
Yeah, I mean, those discussions, I think Jeremy Rutherford, our colleague at The Athletic, got radioed a little bit. Like, I don't think he was saying he was available, but I'm not sure how this all happened, that all of a sudden everyone's talking about Brady Tkachuk getting traded, because that just is not happening. I mean, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Senators had their brass over in Czechia, meeting with him, and not meeting with him to talk about trade destinations. So just don't do that. I think, because he's a foundational pillar of their organization, and, it was the right thing to do. And so, I do think both teams, Buffalo and Ottawa, will be open to thinking about some bigger trades. I mean, the Sabres have already traded Casey Middlestat away in a deal that got them Bo Byram, remember? And so, that Middlestat was a core-ish piece, maybe not core, but pretty, still a young center in the league. And that was a big deal. But I think it shows where management's head's at. I don't think Kevin Adams or Steve Staios, the GMs with the Sabres and Senators respectively, feel like they can just, this is all just going to figure itself out. I think that they're going to be pretty actively looking to upgrade on their rosters, and we'll see what things will go, because both teams have a ton of good players, even some great players. Like it hasn't all come together just yet, but I have trouble imagining those teams getting worse. I think they're both headed in the right direction, but there's a lot of pressure in both situations to take a big step. And I'm talking next season, not 2 years from now.
You know what I realized just as we were talking about Brady Tkachuk? We teased the fact that we were going to talk about, or at least bring up, Marty Necas. I do not think we got to talk about him.
You can play a role like you submitted an Ask CJ question, and it just got included in this segment of the show.
Okay. Julian McKenzie asks, what's going on with Marty Necas?
Well, I'll tell you, because I was around him in Prague there a little bit, they were speaking openly there about sort of dissatisfaction with the way he was used by the Hurricanes, some feeling that, it's time for a fresh start. And this is going to be a tough trade to make. I mean, certainly the Hurricanes are exploring moving him. He's a restricted free agent. He needs a new contract. He's in line for a pretty big raise. Would not surprise me to see him making $7-8 million on the next deal, depending on the length and how it looks. And, the Hurricanes don't just want to trade him for a draft pick or a series of draft picks. They want to get a player back. And so you almost need something like the Middlestat Byram deal to materialize, in which there's another team, maybe with a player the Hurricanes like in a similar age band, maybe in a similar situation where they need a new contract for things to work. And so, whether that's Hronek maybe in Vancouver, I've seen that thrown around as a possibility, I think those kinds of conversations are going to get going now. The Hurricanes now are in a search for a new GM, but Eric Tulsky's running the show on an interim basis there right now. And I think absolutely the player is ready for a fresh start. The organization's willing to give it to him, but they're not going to just toss him away for nothing. And clearly he's a player as value. I mean, he had 4 points in the semifinal game against Sweden. He was the most dominant player on the ice in that game, as an example. And that was a game that featured Hedman and Carlson on the other side, and obviously Pasternak and Zaka, and some others, Palat on the Czech side. So, it's a spicy meatball because he's a good player, and I think it's fair to say his best years are probably ahead as well. But it's not necessarily going to be an easy trade, and so that's kind of where it's at. But I will say it was not even I wouldn't even call it it was like an open secret that he was displeased with the way things went this season with the Hurricanes, and it's been a lot of years there, and maybe he hasn't taken the step, chicken and egg. He hasn't taken the step quite the organization's been looking for. He feels he wasn't put in the best role to do so, and so a fresh start could be in the offing, but it's not going to be a simple trade because they're not just dumping the player.
Vancouver, I wonder if Calgary would be interested, because that seems like the type of player that they want. Young talent. They want especially a good young forward talent on their team. He would make sense as a potential trade target. I know someone, I did like a little AMA before I went on vacation, and someone mentioned that idea. I wasn't sure about the framework they suggested, but in terms of him as an actual trade target for that organization, it does make some sense. I'm also trying to think of other teams that might make sense as a potential landing spot for Natchez.
There's not that many teams that wouldn't make sense. I mean,
you're right.
Obviously, I guess the teams at the very bottom of the standings that aren't looking for a 25-year-old forward necessarily. They want 18 and 20-year-old forwards. But he's moving into prime of career, has all the tools. It hasn't worked in Carolina for whatever reason, but I think lots of teams could look at the skill set package there and be like, we can bring it out of him. It's just finding that fit on the trade front. And Hronek is the best one, example where obviously, he's on an expiring deal, had a great year in Vancouver. I know it didn't end maybe as well as he would have liked, but certainly put up strong numbers, right shot defenseman, needs a new contract, probably can't get the contract from the Canucks he feels he's worth. I mean, maybe just happened to be countrymen, but maybe there's a fit that way, but there must be other examples. I honestly haven't spent too much time on this, what the specific trades would be. But I do know the Hurricanes are of a mind that they need to get a player back, not just a futures package for Natchez.
For sure. From Harry, with Lou Lamoriello making that trade with Chicago with all those draft picks, do you think he's got another trade lined up?
No, I think that was quite literally what it looked like. I think that was Chicago sacrificing, they got a lot of picks to move up in both the first round and the second round. I know there's all those sort of pick valuation charts that, some of them said, why would they do that? They gave up too much. I think it's reasonable to think Chicago might have their own chart, however they measure these things, and they might have felt that was worthwhile. And so I don't know that the only weird part about that trade was the timing. I mean, that's a completely normal type of trade you see at the draft itself. Usually you just don't see it made a month ahead of time, but I'm not wearing my tinfoil hat on that one. I don't think it's a sign of another deal that's in the works. I think Chicago wanted to move up in the draft. They found someone that was willing to do it. And from the Islanders standpoint, they're thinking okay, we moved back a couple spots, but we also added another second round pick. So why, I just think it was two teams that found something that met their needs.
Okay. One last one for you here. At least two different people asked the same variation of this question. Okay. So we'll just throw this one out here. Start, bench, cut. CJ Show host edition. Julian, Jesse, and Steve.
Start, bench, cut.
Yes. Be honest.
Julian, you got to be the starter. We've done 200 plus episodes together. That'd be pretty. It'd be pretty cold of me to put you.
I worried about that for days, brother. Oof! Thank God.
Jesse's on the bench, and Steve, unfortunately, has been placed on waivers.
Damn! Just because your name's on the network doesn't mean you start, buddy. Damn.
I mean, in Steve's defense, he's not normally in the host chair.
No.
Right. Whereas I know Jesse, he's the jack of all trades. He hosts some shows.
Can do anything.
He can be I feel like he's ambidextrous in terms of he can be on either side of the equation. I appreciate Steve stepping in. I had fun with him, but he's more the personality than setting up the questions, I guess. I mean, your personality too, though. So I don't know. I just feel like Steve hasn't as much practice at it. You've had a lot more practice at it, so you're in the starting 5 here, bud.
Question though, the episode you did with Steve, where were you recording from? Why are you in this like dark, dimly lit room with like? Can you take us through that setup, because that looked really creepy?
It's
What's
funny.
going on there?
Some people said they thought that was their favorite ever setup they've seen that I've had on the show. So, I mean,
I'm curious.
It probably looked like I was in like a smoking room or something, but
Yeah,
I was still,
Steve called it a shisha lounge.
At that point, I was still in Prague, and I had a very, very small hotel room there. And so there was like no good shot in the hotel room. Like I would literally almost have to be sitting on the bed to do it. And so there was like kind of a room, like a loungy room in the basement. And that's where I did it from, where they just had like coffee and water out during the day. And I just found the quietest corner I could in that little room and set up down there, because I didn't have anywhere else in a pinch to do it. I guess I could have went to the arena. I've done lots of sort of arena backdrops, but anyway, yeah. So I didn't have a lot of choice. I was in Prague, and that room was available in my hotel. And so that's how that came to be.
It reminded me of the setup you had when you were away for the Global Series, and we had to record with you like in the middle of the night, time, and your voice was really low. It was very smooth. It was very reminiscent of that setup. I don't know if you were serenading him the whole time or what, but Steve must have got a kick out of that.
Sometimes, I mean, look, sometimes we got our home setups going today. Like this is all good, but sometimes we got to improvise, right? So whatever it takes for the 100%ers, my friend.
We appreciate the 100%ers. I appreciate Steve and Jesse for holding down the fort while I was away, and I appreciate you as always, Siege.
I appreciate you too, brother. I'm glad you had a good trip. I presume it was good. Didn't want to jump in there, but you're looking relaxed. You're back, and let's do this. We're in the run up to the Cup final here.
Yeah, we'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode running up to the Cup final. As CJ just said, we'll have stick taps on Thursday, and subscribe to the podcast however you listen to the show, whether on Amazon, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts. We're there. And on YouTube, of course, subscribe to the SDPN YouTube channel. Great work as always, Siege. We'll be back on Thursday. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK and McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.